Hey everyone, welcome back to a new season of the IPFL, edition number 7, I think, this year, 7th year. What I'm going to do first of all is just go through a bit of a retention analysis, hopefully get a few more videos up this year. So if anyone ever wants to join in, let me know. But I'll go solo, see how we go. If it's boring, then I guess you'll be bored. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the Brew Crew. We're going to go through, have a look at each list, and give a bit of a prediction of who I think people might retain. Now, I've upped the graphics this year, so hopefully you'll see just where will it be? Down there somewhere. Might pop up a little thing while I'm talking, so you can see what I'm talking about. So, with the Crew, I've got them. I found these reasonably easy to predict for the Crew, so we'll see how we go. So I've got their highest averaging players in Zach Merrett and Bryce Gibbs at his new club. So Gibbsy's been retained every year by the Crew, so he'll be into his 7th year with them. Then I've got Jake Lloyd, who was retained last year, Patrick Cripps, who came off their rookie list, Tom Lynch from the Crows, Jack Billings, one of the favourite sons down there, Jack McRae. And then my last two selections are a little bit interesting. So I've gone with Pierce Hanley, who didn't really play many games last year, but apparently he's had a good pre-season. He's been retained for 4 years for the Crew, and I reckon they'll go around again with him. And their last selection spot I've given to Callum Mills. Now, this was an interesting one. So Mills is callable, only averaged 48 last year, but I reckon the Crew love him down there. They picked him with about pick 14 a couple of years ago, so I reckon they might retain him and get an extra year into his retention. I'm not sure if he'd go in the first round, but I reckon they might retain him just to get that status a little bit earlier. Now, some interesting ones that might have missed out in my list there. So I've looked over David Armitage, who just was out with injury last year. He's been on the Crew's list for a few years, but I don't think they can stick with him. And also Josh Smith from Collingwood, who had a few good games. I think he got a ton once, but wasn't much good after that. So they're probably the two that have missed out from their list. Also, Devon Smith. There's a lot of talk about him at the Dons this year, and how he'll go. But I don't think they can afford to take the punt on him. He'll still be around for a little while. In terms of their callable situation, as we already mentioned, Callum Mills, they've also got Daniel Rioli, who didn't average very much, so probably not much of an issue for them there. And then the classic Nathan Freeman, still hasn't played a game, but apparently promoted last year by the Crew. So he's callable, but they'll probably won't have to worry about that, but they might pick him up in the last round and keep him on their list. In terms of their rookies, got a bit of a mixed bunch of rookies. So Riley Bonner and Jack Scrimshaw haven't played much. They can be retained. Their best rookie is probably Matthew Kennedy from who's moved to Carlton now. Averaged 45 last year, so he'll do quite well, I think. And also Jared Berry and Tim Taranto. So they've played too many games, so they'll have to make a decision on those two. All right, we'll move on to the next team, going alphabetically here. So we'll move on to the Horses. Now, interesting decisions for the Horses too, I found. They've got a few players that they've retained every year. So Dusty, Rocky, Sloan and Fife all been retained for 5 years, so this will be their 6th retentions. So they'll obviously be a good rookie crop in a few years. Veteran crop in a few years. Now, on top of those four, I've got Seb Ross, Rory Laird, Adam Treloar, and then I've added Matty Cruiser, who averaged nearly 80 last year, and then I've given the nod to Brad Hill, and the last spot I've gone with Dylan Shiel, mainly because he's been retained for a number of years by the Horses, and I reckon that they'll back him in. Although his averages haven't actually been that much higher than 60, so that'll be an interesting call whether they keep backing him in and hope he gets better, or they look to someone else. So in terms of the horses, they're retaining 8 of the same 10 from last year, with Cruiser and Hill being the only 2 additions. The Crew, I also retained 8 out of 10 from last year. Now, some people that are probably unlucky. So I've missed here Aaron Hall and Johannesson. So they were retained last year, but I I I don't know. Johannesson had one good year, I think, and he didn't do much last year. Aaron Hall could easily slip in ahead of Dylan Shield. I guess they just have to decide who's gonna um, go better in the long term, I guess. And also Brad Hill. I mean, he averaged 65. That's probably the best he's going to average, but it's hard to delist him. So probably unlucky for Aaron Hall not to get a spot there. The other one, I guess, yet another younger player, Connor Blakely, had a bit of a breakout year, so they might look at him, but maybe a bit of a smoky. In terms of their rookies, their callable players, they've got an interesting list. So they've got Clayton Oliver, average 62. Now I haven't put him in the retentions. I reckon he might slip through the first round, mainly because he just loves handballing. But he'll definitely go first or second round. So they might think about slipping him in again, but I'd probably still keep some of those other guys over Oliver. Then they've also got Amon, Petrarca, and Wiedering as callable players. So they'll probably call all of those throughout the draft, but probably Oliver the only concern early. The others will probably go a little bit later. Their rookies for last year, the horses, they've got Darcy, Setterfield, and English, who can all still retain on the list. So they'll probably do that with all of them, especially Setterfield with the injury. English, good ruck rookie. And then they've got Scharenberg and Ainsworth. So they've played more than 10 games. So they'll go straight onto the senior list, I would imagine. All right. Now, next team, we move on to the Blue Lake Bandits, managed by Andy Costa. New father, congratulations. New uncle here, doing good uncle duties, if you might add. Now, interesting list here. So I've only got them retaining 7 of their 10 from last year. Got 3 new additions. Now they look a bit thin, the Bandits this year, particularly because Sam Doherty's done his ACL, so he won't be in. But I've kept him in their retentions. I think a player of his caliber, you've got to retain, even though he's done the knee. I think they've got to back him in. So I've got Doherty, then I've got Ryder, Hunter, Kennedy, Jack Stephen, and then the 2 Pies boys in Sidebottom and Pendlebury, they've also been retained every year. So they're the 7 from last year. Then I've added in Menegola, Zaharakis, and then Will Hoskin Elliott, who seems to have had a good year last year. Now he's a bit of a smoky. I've put him in there. Menegola and Zaharakis, hard to know with those. So it's not going to be a strong 8, 9, 10 sort of position with their retentions, especially given that one of their retentions won't play for the whole year. Some people are probably unlucky to miss out here. Leuenberger, just really not sure, and also with the Hammers having Bell Chambers, we're not sure about who's going to be the number 1 ruck there. So Berger averaged 64, but he's up and down, and he didn't play a lot of the time, and he had a bit of an interrupted preseason, so I think it's a bit of a risk to retain him, especially when you already know that Doherty's out. And then they also lost Kurt Tipper, who retired, and then the other one that missed out from last year's group of retentions was Tom Scully, who only averaged low 50s last year, so I don't think you can retain him on that. They don't really have anything else any wild cards, I guess. In their callable situation, they've got Dumont, Cox, and Sharkey. So again, probably all sort of middle of the draft, so nothing really to worry about there. Probably Cox might go the earliest. Sharkey, key forward, probably not going to go too early, so not too much to worry about for them. Their rookies, so they've got Aaron Francis and Pickett, who can both be retained. Francis, obviously, with his mental health condition, so he doesn't look like he's going to play for a while. And then they've got Tom Phillips, who will be a good promotion, average 55, and then also Petrevsky Seaton, and then Malera as well. So a few good promotions there. But having a look at through the different lists, I think the Bandits probably going to be in a bit of trouble unless they draft well, which they have done the last 3 or 4 years. So they'll need to do that again, going in with a weaker list. All right, next up is Blake 7. Now, Blake's is the hardest one of all of the teams to kind of predict here. So we'll start with the players that have been retained previously. So there's 7 here. So I've got Jared Witts, Lockie Neal, Ollie Wines, Joel Selwood, Paddy D, Dyson Heppel, and Trent Cotchin. So it's a pretty core group there. And then I've added in Toby Nankovitz, averaged 66 last year. It looks like the number 1 ruck at the Tigers. He's callable actually for Blakes, but I don't think you can risk him at all. So they'll retain him. Then the 2 new additions, I've added Hurley and Robertson, who were steals at the draft last year. Good scouting by Blakes, both averaged in the mid-60s. So I've included them as the last couple of positions. Although I would probably say the weakest of their attentions is probably, of the ones I've listed there, is probably Joel Selwood, but it seems kind of silly that you wouldn't retain him. However, he only averaged 59 last year. But yeah, it's hard. It'd be hard to delist him, I think. But the ones that have missed out, so some interesting people here. So I've dropped off Big Sanderlands. I think he's just too old, and even though he'll score well, I think Blake's is better to keep a younger player than Sanderlands. Then I've also dropped off Blitzarves, who without the third man up last year, his scores dropped away considerably. And also Nathan Jones, who was retained previously. So those 3 could quite easily slip in ahead of Selwood, but I think you'd have to go with Selwood there. The only other ones, I guess, Jeremy Cameron, he had a good year, and Isaac Smith had a reasonable year as well. Both averaged over 60, but I think, again, he could probably throw a blanket over about 10 of them there, which he wouldn't do. But that's inappropriate. But, yeah, really hard to predict here. I think Ken's a man of his word, and I reckon he would have given long-term contracts to Selwood and the likes, and he'll stick with what he knows rather than taking a punt on some of those other players, although he does love Jeremy Cameron, so don't be surprised if he just slips in there somewhere. He's got 2 callable players, Sicily and Caleb Daniel. Sicily is an interesting one. He's got too many. He's going to have to risk putting him in the draft and hope he doesn't go in the first round. But Daniel will go mid-draft somewhere probably. Sicily probably will go 2nd or 3rd round or something. So some interesting calls for Kenny to make. In terms of his other players, his rookies. So he doesn't have too much coming off the rookies this year. He can retain Gallucci from the Crows, but his other 4 he has to do something with, but they haven't really done a great deal. So we've got Powell, Pepper, McPherson, and Markov, and Darcy Cameron from Sydney. So I think there's a mistake in the spreadsheet. He can retain him. But yeah, not a great deal there to promote off the rookie list. All right, on to everyone's least favourite. My least favourite team, the Gladstone Grizzlies, managed by one of my favourite people, Josh West, and then some other guy. Now, Grizzlies, terrible year last year. Hoping to bounce back. Can't remember how many games they won. Maybe 3, 4 maybe. Now, interestingly, even though they had a poor year, I've got them retaining 8 of the same 10 that they retained last year. So running through them, we've got Stefan Martin, Tom Lynch, Whitfield, Wingard, Goddard, Shuey, and Jack Redden. I think they'll back Redden in. He seems to have had a good preseason. And then the other one is Jaeger O'Meara. So even though he had a bad year, the Grizz have put 4 or 5, 6 years into him. So I think they'll keep retaining him and let him have a full season and see how he goes. But personally, I wouldn't keep him. But I think the Grizz like to show a bit of faith, just like they did with Wingard, and he's come good. So very loyal managers down there at the the Grizz. Now, two new additions. I've added in Brad Ebert, who they picked up at the start of the draft last year, and also Michael Hibbert, who was a good pickup as well. So those two players averaged nearly 65, so they'll complement the list quite well. Some players to miss out here. So Brett Deledio has been on the list for 6 years, but I don't think they can go around again. He just seems a bit old and seems to be struggling. And also Travis Boak, who I know they traded for. But I reckon with all the new recruits that Port have got, he's probably going to play a lot less midfield time. So I reckon they'll get rid of him. The other one is maybe Ryan Burton. Now, they did pick him up in the draft, and there's a lot of talk about how good he is, but I don't know if he's going to slot into a retention place. It just depends which way they want to go and whether they want to back O'Meara in. Their callable situation, they've got Darcy Parish and Braden Maynard, both average 50, so there'll be a couple of handy promotions, but not anything to worry about in terms of going early in the draft. And then their rookies, so they've got the big Price, who hopefully will be number 2 to Goldie all year. He can stay on the rookie list, but it'll be interesting to see if they promote him anyway, just to have that option there. They've also got Howard, another ruck in Riley O'Brien, and then Hugh Goddard. All of those players can be retained. Goddard, I don't know what he's been doing. I think he's been injured for the last couple of years. And then their 5th rookie, not sure, he's not even on an AFL list anymore. Might have played for Collingwood, Jackson Ramsey. That's my guess. Tell me if I'm right. But yeah, so they've only got 4, and they can retain all of them. So they could potentially not have to pick any rookies in the draft, which could be a good thing. But it'll be interesting to see if they free up one of those spots, maybe with getting rid of Goddard and having a spot for someone else. All right, on to the Jets. Now, the Jets, this was second hardest to Blake's, but for the opposite reason. So the Jets have been decimated with delistings and retirements and people going into nursing homes and all sorts of things. So they've lost Rewalt, Montagna, someone else. And so their retentions are a little bit trickier to do. So I've gone with 7 of the same. So Josh Kelly, Josh Kennedy, Heath Shaw, Crouch, Ellis, Ablett, and Hanbury. Then I've added in Rory Atkins, who's callable. Only average 55, but I reckon purely because they've had a lot of older players, and even in their retentions there, they've got Shaw and Ellis and Ablett and Hanbury. I reckon keeping Atkins, even though he's callable, is a good decision, but they might let him go into the draft. The reason I've got him is my other 2 spots I've filled with Taylor Walker and Jared Roughhead. Now, both key forwards, so maybe potentially not a good decision. But I couldn't really find anyone else. Maybe Westhoff or May. But again, there's really slim pickings there for the Jets. So that's why I've put Rory Atkins in. Because I think that would be a wise move over taking a punt on someone like Westhoff, who will still average about the same anyway. So now their callable situation, they've got 4 players. So they've got Lockie Weller, who had the big move to the Gold Coast. So he should be a good player. And also Orazio, BT's favourite, Dunkley and Anderson. So they're all callable. Weller's probably going to go the earliest, but nothing probably to worry about too early. And for their rookie situation, they've got not a lot really. So they've got Mitch Hibbard, Florent, Barrett, and Simpkin. So they're really going to struggle. They're going to have maybe 6 or 7 decent players, and then 3 mid-50 averaging players. So they're going to really need to draft well if they're going to maintain their standing. Although they seem to draft well each year and finish up near the top, so we won't knock them too much. Mainly because they're all old and frail and will fall over. Okay, on to the Mafia Mob, everyone's favourite team. Certainly my second favourite team anyway. and finally came through with the goods last year, making it to the big GF and agonisingly losing to the. I can't really remember who won last year. No, I don't know. Probably doesn't matter anyway. That was all in the past. So then we've got for the mob. I've got them retaining 7 of their previous 10. So Bontempelli, Polidashny, Nunes, Adams, Caniglio, Zeeble, and Prestia. Even though he only averaged 51, that was at a new club last year. I reckon he'll be okay. Then 3 additions, who were 3 amazing draft picks for them last year. Murphy and McAvoy both averaging over 70, and then also Jeremy Howe averaging mid-60. So that rounds out their 10. Some interesting players to miss out here. So Dom Tyson, he was retained last year, and also Jack Crisp just dropped off a little bit. Tyson's injured as well, and Crisp, I don't know, he doesn't seem to be able to get above that 60 average. And then also Kieran Jack, who's been a loyal servant at the mob, played almost every game, been retained every year, but only averaged 48 last year, so you can't sort of retain that sort of player. So they'll miss out. The other one may be Charlie Dixon, Jack Rewalt, but they're key forwards and probably pick them up again in the draft sometime. Interesting one, maybe Billy Hartung. A lot of talk about him, but again, I think their list of 10 there, it'd be hard to squeeze anyone out of that list. They've got a couple of callable players, so they've got Ben Keys and Jaden Laverde. Again, not anything huge there in terms of average, so there won't be any worry for the mob on the day. Got a few good rookies though. They've got Fiorini, McGrath, and Hopper, so they'll all be promoted onto the list. So they'll have 10 solid retentions as well as those 3. So starting from a good place. Then also Brody and Venables, who they can retain on their rookie list. So mob looking pretty good. 10 solid retentions, 3 solid promotions before we get to the draft. So if Sammy T can rock up on time, got to get that joke in every year. They should be able to put together a reasonable list again and challenge for the flag. All right, on to everyone's, no one's favourite team. So the MC Hammersteins. Now, interesting year for the Hammersteins, doing it via correspondence with Steiny moving interstate. So it'll be interesting to see how things go, especially at the draft. Cotty will be absolutely rattled trying to communicate with everyone, as well as do his own picks and stop Steiny picking all the elderly brigade. Now, lots of discussions here. So I've got my predictions. Can't tell you how accurate they are, but I've got 7 people from last year's 10. So Simpson, Gawn, Grundy, Goldie, Mitchell, Franklin, and Parker. So they were all retained last year and certainly will all go around again. Then the last few spots are a bit tricky. So on here, I've given the nod to Tom Bellchambers from the Bombers, who had averaged 70 last year in half a season, but really depends if he's going to be number 1 or not. And then Billy Longer, who's in the same situation, so played half a year, knocked Hickey out of the both the Hammers team and the Saints team, averaged 60 odd. So those 2 are probably risky. Maybe the Hammers might only think about retaining one of those. Really depends on who's the number 1 ruck. They also have Tom Hickey as well, so it's really a luck of the draw who you retain or no one really there. And the last spot's an interesting spot. So I've given the nod here to Luke McDonald. A lot been talked about him. Picked up in the draft at the end of last year by the Hammers. So I've given the nod to him, but I mean, there's a few players that could fit into that spot. So they're Basher Hooley, one of their favourites. Nick Newman, picked up in the mid-season draft. Also some special mentions to Jordan Lewis. He could easily fit that last spot if the Hammers wanted to go with a solid player. Didn't have the best year last year, but has been at the Hammers since the start. And also maybe Hodgie, a bit of a wild card. Won't play every game, but it might be he's like really old, so Steiny may win the argument there and be able to slip him into the retentions. The Hammers have 4 callable players, so Howe and Matheson, and then McCartan and Jake Polidashny. So all solid players, but no one that's going to go probably in the first 3 or 4 rounds, as they had last year with Brayshaw and De Goey. Now, I haven't included either of them in the Hammers list either, so they're probably maybe another one that they might consider, but De Goey's off being a criminal, and Brayshaw, yeah, it just seems unreliable with his concussion issues. Off their rookie list, so there's not really much to look forward to here. So Jack Bowes and Jake Kelly can both be promoted, but didn't average 40 last year. And then they've got Durden, Smith, and Partington, who can all be retained, but yeah, not great rookieing by the Hammers last year, so they might look at rectifying that. All right, 2 more teams to go. We've got next up is the Swampy Hoodrats, or Hobbits, if you will, if you want to be correct. Now, Hobbits, quite an easy list here. So I've got them retaining 8 of their previous 10. And interestingly, with the Hobbits, they've got the most players, 5, who have been retained every year since the competition started. So they've got Jacobs, Beams, Green, Barlow, and Ward being retained every year. And then I'm also adding to the list Grigg, Heaney, and Jesse Hogan as a bit of a wild card. Only averaged 49, but I reckon they'll back him in again. And then the last 2 spots, I've given one to Elliot Yeo, who was a great pickup, averaged nearly 70. And then the last spot, I've gone with Jack Steele. Now, Steele is callable, but I reckon he's going to be a 10-year player. So I reckon the Hobbits will keep him, much like they did with Jesse Hogan last year, and also Isaac Heaney, who were both potentially callable. I reckon they'll back Steele in and retain him. Some players probably unlucky here. Maybe Gunston. He's been retained for the last 4 years, but he's another one of those ones that will average around 60, but the Hobbits seem to have more players averaging over 60 now, so they probably don't need to retain the likes of him. Maybe Dom Sheed, a bit of a younger player that is averaging quite good, but yeah, nothing else really there. A couple of callables, Mitch McGovern and Menadue, but again, probably middle of the draft type players. Now their rookie list, they've got McCluggage is probably the main one there, so he's averaging 41. But the others, Logue, Parfitt, and Graham, yeah, nothing to write home about there. Graham can be retained, but Parfitt and Logue they need to do something with, but I guess maybe promote them, but they didn't really average much last year. And then finally, onto the tough fluffs, or Toonbitter fluffs, or can't remember what they were called when Andy Costa was managing them. Something. So we've got 7 players here, 7 of the 10 from last year. So I think the least we had was 6. Okay, so most teams maintaining a core group of their retentions. Getting closer to veterans too, which will be exciting. So the fluffs, I've got them retaining Nadanui, Duncan, Gaff, Viney, Martin, Matt Crouch, and Zorko. They were all retained last year. And then I've added in Zach Smith, who seems to have got the number 1 ruck spot at Geelong. Joe Danaher, who was a great pickup from an ex-Horse. And then also Jared Lyons, who seems to have found a good home there at the Gold Coast. The only player here that's probably unlucky, I've dropped Lukey Dowhouse. He's been a favourite down at the Fluffs, but he didn't have a great year last year. Neither did Stephen Hill, actually. So both of those players have been at the Fluffs for a few years, but couldn't find a spot for them in this list. Also Liam Shields. Now, he might step up this year, but again, he's a bit up and down, hard to predict, so loves a tackle, but I haven't included him either. They've actually got quite a few players in the 55 to 60 sort of averaging range, so they could throw a surprise or two there, but I think a reasonably straightforward list of 10. They've got 2 callables, Moore and Gresham, average mid-40, so there's a lot of callable players that will go around pick 100, I reckon, this year in the draft, without many going really early. It'll depend on who gets retained, obviously, but I think a lot of players are going to go in that middle section more than I can remember in past years, which I guess means people picking better rookies. And finally, to finish up, the Fluffs rookies. So they've got a bunch of crap, basically, on their rookie list. Joe Atley, Ryan Clark, I've at least heard of him. Tom Stewart, Harrison Wigg, and Kieran Lovell. So Wigg and Lovell haven't played a game. Lovell's been on their rookie list for many years. So probably the best one there is Clark, who'll probably be promoted, but the rest. Alright, so there we are. 30 minutes. Done. 10 teams. There's your retentions. Now you don't have to do anything. You can just submit them on the website. Apparently getting the spreadsheet sent to me tonight, but probably unlikely, so we'll see how we go. Alright guys, thanks for listening. Good luck to this year.